Hello, I'm David from DN Cognitive Counseling. Today I want to talk about something that is very problematic in the mental health field, and that is stigma. A lot of people fear going to therapists or seeking mental health because they're afraid of certain labels and being called certain names and then being stigmatized by society. There was a video that I came across that enforces that stigma in a very, I think, inappropriate way. And I thought by having this discussion and talking about it, we could bring this to light and hopefully be able to correct certain misconceptions. So I'm going to play you a clip from the video first, and then I'm going to go ahead and comment on it. And please, if you have a comment on it, I would love to hear yours at the bottom of the screen. So without further ado,
what is the difference between crazy and not crazy? To me, crazy is being out of touch with reality, and being sane is being in touch with reality. Now, in our society, there's all sorts of talk about what insanity is, what mental illness is, what reality is, and the mental health field defines all these terms, and it gives diagnoses to people when they become more and more and more crazy, more mentally ill. But I actually don't hold those to be necessarily true at all.
For those of you who have seen my videos before, you know that's Daniel Mackler, who's a psychotherapist for 10 years and has given up on the field. I am deeply disturbed by his definition of crazy. He seems to associate crazy with having a mental health issue. He actually gives examples of things like depression or anxiety. These things that people utilize and go, man, if you have that, you must be crazy. But if you took a look at the Merriam-Webster dictionary and you looked up the word crazy, which I think what Daniel is actually talking about is the idea of not mentally sound, marked by a thought or action that lacks reason. In other words, whether you are having a mental health issue does not make you crazy, at least according to even the definition in the dictionary. He is confusing and conflating different definitions, mental illness, with being out of touch with reality. You could be very much in touch with reality and suffer from anxiety disorder. You could go ahead and have difficulty dealing with grief and be in touch with reality. You could go ahead and have many different psychiatric disorders that have nothing to do with being out of touch with reality. And I would never, ever, ever call any of my patients crazy. It's inappropriate and wrong. The aspect that Daniel wants to define crazy by his definition is very sweet and nice, but it promotes a stigma on people with real issues that need help and are not treating them with the respect they deserve. What we normally talk about in parlance is when somebody does something that doesn't make any sense and people say, wow, that's crazy. In AA, they talk about the aspect of the insanity of the addiction. Now, do people in AA think that they were insane, literally like they should be locked up? Well, some of them have. But they don't use the term insanity to mean the crazy things they did when they were drunk. The term insanity they mean is that they were taking a drug while they were sober, despite all the negative consequences, and still doing that. They didn't recognize that their behavior was insane to themselves. But nobody would say somebody with an addiction, man, you're crazy. You would say that person has a disease and they need help, which is the reason why you help them by detox and rehab and outpatient programs. The idea is to help them, not to label them. And the idea that we go ahead and call people crazy is just inappropriate. So I take issue with the term, are you crazy or not, to begin with. You don't want to refer to people in that way. Now, you can ask people, are your behaviors adaptive in functioning or maladaptive in functioning? And that is a very different question. I don't think people with schizophrenia who are hearing voices, seeing demons, think that what they're feeling and hearing are good to their lives. And I don't think that they want to go ahead and be called crazy. I think they want help to get better. So I really wish that we wouldn't be asking the question, are you crazy or not? And I don't like the aspect of labeling people this way, and especially to make the connection between mental illness and that term, because all it does is reinforce a stigma that none of us deserve. But let's go and listen to another point that Daniel makes on his video.
Because I think a lot of times certain behavior in society that's considered very healthy can actually really fundamentally be crazy. And there can be behavior in society that is considered crazy that actually is very, very healthy. So what does it mean for a person to be out of touch with reality? To me, what that means is to be unconscious. And what does that mean? To be unconscious means you're split off. You're not aware of what's really going on. And part of being out of touch with reality, part of being unconscious, means using psychological defenses to deal with the world, to interpret reality. For instance, one of them is denial. So to be in denial, to me, is fundamentally to be crazy. It means
So according to Daniel, society has its good points and bad points. And people are crazy if they follow society on things that Daniel deems to be insane. That's great if Daniel's God. The aspect here as judge and jury for society is a little scary. So if Daniel deems something healthy, then it's healthy. But society can't determine if something's healthy. Only Daniel can. And I don't really appreciate the fact that Daniel, who puts himself as the idea of a mental health professional, then seems to put himself as the arbiter for what's healthy and unhealthy and judging societies. In fact, Daniel goes further to state that anybody in denial is crazy. Daniel, you actually say it later, but the reality is denial is a normal defense mechanism that everybody in the entire world uses. And the reality is they're not all crazy because they use defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are healthy. They're normal. They're supposed to be used. They're ways for us to develop healthy coping mechanisms. You see, we all in our body have nerves. Those nerves have myelin sheaths that prevent us from going ahead and hurting them. We then have skin and bone that go around them to create more protection. Psychological defense mechanisms are like the skin and bone and myelin sheaths that protect us. They're not all harmful. Now, it's true that if you overuse a defense mechanism, it becomes a problem. But not because you're crazy. It's a defense mechanism that you utilize to protect yourself that gets overused, and you need to learn how to change that. That does not, again, mean crazy. And I, again, find it very disrespectful to people who are suffering to be called that. So let's go to the next point.
Dissociation is another one, being emotionally split off from the reality of an event, perhaps being split off from a whole part of one's personality, perhaps splitting off so far that you can't even remember what happened, people being totally disassociated from their childhoods, not remembering anything. It's like it's all in there, the memories are there, but a person is not connected to the reality or to part of the reality of what is actually going on. Stuff that if they were not dissociated, they would know it, they would feel it, they would remember it, they would be in touch with it, they would be able to talk about it. But they're not, and that to me is crazy, to be dissociated.
So, Daniel explains that dissociative people are crazy because they're not in touch. For anybody that has been the victim of a sexual assault in childhood or even in adulthood, we know that that is a very traumatic event. It is natural and normal for the brain in such a traumatic event to try to protect itself from that trauma. That is not crazy that you can't remember it. It is not crazy that you put a barrier between that event and you. It is healthy. Now, it's true that as you keep that barrier for a long period of time, it can lead to secondary problems. But that doesn't mean that the nature of the defense makes you crazy. And to insinuate that all sexual assault victims are crazy because that happens, I find reprehensible. And I find that it's a disservice again and a misjudgment on how the mental health field actually treats the patient. We don't look at people as being crazy. And I don't like the entire flavor of the way this was presented in a disrespectful way to people who go through trauma and suffer. So let's go on to the next point.
Now, I want to make the caveat that with any defense mechanism, denial, dissociation, repression, projection, basically projection being seeing unresolved, unconscious, split off parts of ourselves in somebody else. Well, all these defenses are ways of not seeing reality. So the caveat is that we all have them. The caveat is I think we're all a bit crazy. We all have certain defenses. We're all to some degree unconscious. I haven't met anybody that's fully resolved all their traumas, that has no unconscious left. That when you consider we're all a bit that way, well, when it comes to the big societal level, people have overlapping areas of unconsciousness. People are out of touch with reality in the same way. And you can get a whole family, you can get a whole village, a whole town, a whole country even, that pretty much all accepts a certain falsity about reality in the same way. And so you could call that a common delusion, a mass delusion. There's lots of them out there. You know, there's that saying that's so interesting culturally, and I've experienced this also, that sometimes people from other cultures, even very, very different cultures, don't even speak our language, could come to our country and see things about our country that is like crazy to them and out of touch with reality. They can see the flaws in our culture sometimes better than we can because they don't necessarily have those same flaws. They have a perspective on what we're doing, and they can see the mass delusions. But by the same token, we might be able to go to their culture and step inside theirs and just say, oh my God, they are insane. Some of the stuff they're doing, and stuff that they call tradition, or they can call their religion, they can call it their reality. This is the way the world is. And we can look at it and say, that's not true. That's not reality. That's crazy.
Wow. There you have it. Daniel actually admits, in terms of his caveat, that everybody, according to his definition, is crazy because everybody uses the defense mechanisms. And he's right. That's absolutely true. Everybody uses those defense mechanisms. Everybody has levels of unconscious that we don't ever reach. 100% true. But if everybody's crazy, by Daniel's definition, then nobody's crazy because that's just a statement of fact in terms of definitions. You can't have a definition that encompasses everything. Otherwise, then you're not talking about anything. And that's the problem. If everything is art, then nothing is art. If everything is water, then nothing is water. Because in order to go ahead and have a distinction, there has to be something else to distinguish it from. And that's what we do when we talk about adaptive or maladaptive in functioning. When somebody has a depression, it's not a matter of they're crazy, but they have a depression because comparatively to the norm of the way that people have their emotions, they don't walk around feeling depressed. People are euthymic. People have dissociative disorders. People that have a neurosis, anxiety. Because that other people don't walk around with them, that's the reason why these things are problematic. And we've developed treatment for them. Daniel then goes on to explain how society can have mass delusions and therefore is crazy. Now, Daniel's correct in the sense that different societies will see different behaviors. But this is one of the reasons why we learn about cultural sensitivity. It's actually a very big movement in psychology, in sociology, is understanding how people relate to their cultures and where their beliefs come from. Daniel's incorrect that as therapists or in psychotherapy, we make judgments based upon people's religions or their belief systems. If Rachel Maddow or Glenn Beck came to see me, I don't think either of them would be, quote unquote, as he puts it, crazy. Different points of view. Don't agree with each other on almost anything. Or I get a Ben Shapiro or Bernie Sanders. Totally opposite ends of a spectrum. But neither are crazy. They have different points of view, different frames of reference, different thought process, but not crazy. The problem is the definition here is based upon a judgment of these societies and thought processes. Now, when you take a look at a society where there is something called a maladaptive behavior in that society, and another society comes along and tries to stop that behavior, there are these arguments. But we tread very, very lightly when it comes to this, and you have to be very, very careful. You don't want to use your ego as a means of feeling that now you're the judge and jury. We have to be more respectful of other people's belief systems and culture. And I'm sorry if that makes some people uncomfortable, but it is imperative if you're going to be sensitive to other people, but also truthful. Because as much as Daniel seems to know the truth, that he knows reality, that's a delusion in itself. If you've ever studied epistemology, how you know what you know, then you know you can never do that. You can approximate or believe or think, but the reality is you always are questioning that because you may not be right. That's what we do in science all the time. We have a theory. Now, most of our theories are very true and based in fact of repeatable experimentation. But if another fact comes along that pokes a hole in that theory, we don't go, oh my God, we were all crazy up until then. We were wrong. For 2,000 years, science believed the universe was static. They don't believe that anymore. But the point was, those old scientists who believed it were not crazy. They just were wrong. You could be wrong without, as Daniel puts it, being crazy. I think this is, again, a very big disservice. But let's go on to the next point.
That's part of cultural politeness, is that we can accept other people, and there's multiple realities, and everybody has their own reality. Now, personally, I don't believe that. I believe internally people can believe that they have their own reality, but to me, I believe there is one reality. There aren't multiple realities. So the problem is, in society, if you have a behavior that's much healthier than a commonly accepted delusion of society, you're going to probably be called crazy. For instance, someone who's going through a massive grief process and is really working through a lot of their traumas and talking about horrible, painful things that they've gone through and crying a lot. They're thawing out the mask that held the lies of who they were in place, held their persona in place, held their false self in place, the person that they had to be to survive in their family. When people start really grieving a lot of their childhood traumas, this mask starts coming down, and sometimes a lot of emotions come out that have been repressed for a long time, emotions that are commonly repressed throughout society. Well, sometimes when these things come out and people start, let's say, talking about family secrets, this goes against the grain of society. This is not considered healthy behavior. This is not what people do in our reality. Well, society can call those people crazy. Sometimes even if they go to mental health practitioners, they can get diagnostic labels for their healthy, healing behavior. Oh, you're crying too much. You're grieving? The therapist might not relate to this at all. The psychiatrist might be very scared of it because he or she is not doing it, him or herself. So they will pathologize it in another person. Oh my God, you have a major depressive disorder. Oh my God, you're having mood swings. You're bipolar. You need to take an antipsychotic. It happens all the time.
Daniel goes ahead and says, there's only one reality. I'm wondering which one Daniel thinks is that one reality. And does that mean anybody who disagrees with Daniel is outside of that reality? There's something called pathological certainty. I know because I believe. That's not really helpful. I don't think there's only one aspect of reality. I also don't believe that we just pathologize people because they have different viewpoints. We look at the news. We see on different news stations people presenting different points of view. I don't think all these people are crazy. You read throughout history and books that people present different points of view. They're not crazy either. Daniel then talks about the field pathologizing people for going and expressing themselves to others about their emotional states. Now, if you bring to your office your deep emotional issues and you are spilling them all over the place, that would be inappropriate. If you bring them to your therapist and your therapist pathologizing your issues, that's a problem too. Because in order to go ahead and give somebody a diagnosis, they have to meet the criteria. And crying about grief issues does not fall under major depressive disorder. It definitely is not schizophrenic. They have certain criteria that have to be met in order to meet those diagnoses. I don't think any psychiatrist I know just goes around just identifying people to pathologize them. On the other hand, there are many people who have many mental health issues that are not diagnosed and not treated, and they suffer because of them, and they get hurt because of them. It is not a service to somebody not to be treated for a mental health issue that they're actually suffering from. And to minimize the way that somebody emotionally feels and say, well, that's now a diagnosis, then I don't know where you practiced, but that's not how you diagnose anybody. Could a diagnosis be wrong? Absolutely. But a diagnosis is only a work in progress based upon the information that you have. And if you find that new information, diagnosis can be changed. Because ultimately, the purpose of diagnosis is only in reference to treatment. You want to help people to have the proper diagnosis to get the proper treatment. But to say to somebody that you're crying, therefore now you're these diagnoses, is just inappropriate. There's something called complicated grief. I worked in hospice for a number of years. So a lot of people who had complicated grief. None of them got these diagnoses. But if you had a death in the family and 5 years later you're still mourning it like it was happening last week, there is a problem. Because your brain did not develop the coping mechanisms to deal with it appropriately as should over time. That does not make you crazy again, but it is an issue that you'd want help with. And I think, again, the idea is not to pathologize people with mental health issues, but to help them. And to say these people are crazy or those people are crazy, or society is crazy because I determine it's so and there's only one way of seeing things, I don't believe that is helpful to anybody and actually is very harmful. Let's go on to the next point.
The problem is that it's very hard to go against the norms of society. It's very hard to go against the delusions of society, because if you go against the delusions of society, you're going to be called crazy. So basically, from a conventional perspective of society, there are two different groups of people that get labeled crazy. There are the people who are more delusional, more out of touch with reality than the rest of conventional society. So in a way, they're more sick, more disturbed, have stronger defense mechanisms than society. Those people are like, okay, so if we consider society as pretty crazy, the people who are on the extreme end of crazy will get called crazy. They're going to get labeled mentally ill. They're going to get all these different diagnoses. You're this, you're that. You have major depression. You're psychotic. You're whatever. You have a personality disorder. You're schizophrenic, whatever. And then there are people at the other pole who are actually much healthier than society and have much fewer defenses, are able to see reality much more for what it is. And those people are a real threat to society. People don't like them. Society gets very scared of them. Oh my God, because those people, just with their natural way of being, are going to pressure society to change. And society doesn't necessarily want to change.
There you have it. Yeah. Society does not like change. There's no question about it. Families, by the way, also don't like change. If you ever took a family systems course, you learn about something called family homeostasis, the fact that the family wants to maintain its roles. And there's a reason why that happens. There's also a reason why society doesn't want to make changes. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, I don't think were ever considered to be crazy. People disagreed, people didn't like, people fought back, but not crazy. I think there are a lot of people that fight against societal norms, and nobody considers them crazy. This idea that Daniel is saying that anybody that tries to buck the system is now crazy, I don't agree with, and I think there's a lot of people you could point to that will show you that that's not the case. Are there some people who, once they try to buck the system that society thought was crazy? Absolutely. But many people, absolutely not. And that's, again, societal calling, not a mental health professional. Now, the reality is that Daniel, again, talks about people who are schizophrenics and people that are having psychosis and all those people. That, again, is not crazy people. They're suffering people. They're mentally unhealthy. They need help, not labels. And this idea of just like almost talking down that these people are somehow sick and therefore because their sickness they're crazy is also inappropriate. The truth is that the two diagnoses that people in layman's would call most crazy would be generally people that suffer from a psychosis or schizophrenia. And it goes back to the original definition that I told you earlier, which is that you lose touch with your behavior for the reason why you're doing it. You ask a schizophrenic why they're going ahead and doing a certain behavior, they can't give you the reason why they're doing it, or the reason does not match up to what's going on in their life. I'll give you an example. I had a client who was flushing toilets because the toilet flushing was going to go ahead and stop the bombs and the terrorists from happening. Now, we know that the toilets don't do that. And we know that the person who was doing that, the reason didn't follow. And when the person got healthy, they were able to recognize and see that that was a problem. That does not mean that the person stays in that unhealthy way, and it doesn't make them crazy. But they need to learn to be able to get better and get healthy. So again, I have to say it's very important not to utilize these terms in such flippant ways and to understand what they mean. Let's go on to the next point.
It's very painful for society. It's very painful for individuals to start looking at themselves more realistically, to heal their defense mechanisms, to face societal trauma, to face individual trauma. So what do? They pathologize healthy people, and they say, you're crazy, you're schizophrenic, you're bipolar, you're depressed, you have a personality disorder, there's something wrong with you. And the question is, what category is a person? Where do they really fall? Are they crazy, or actually are they healthier than society's craziness? Well, I think sometimes people can fall into both categories. I've seen people who are in mental hospitals who they themselves say, I've lost my mind. I'm psychotic right now. I'm super paranoid. But yet they can say things that I'm like, wait a second, this person is actually much, much healthier than, regular society.
Daniel reminded me of a joke I heard many years ago about a man who is driving along and his car breaks down next to a psychiatric hospital. And it was just a flat tire, and he takes out all the lug nuts of the tire and he puts them on the ground and he gets the other tire. The lug nuts fall down into it grates into the sewer system, and he lost the ability to go ahead and put the tire on. And he's very upset. Suddenly a man from inside the psychiatric hospital screams out, why don't you take one lug nut off the other 3 tires and put it on that, and then you can go ahead and drive your car? And the man whose car was broken down says, that's genius! I don't know why I didn't think of that. How in the world did you, who's in a psychiatric hospital, come up with that? The man screamed out, I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. Daniel is making this mistake when he talks about the idea that somebody in a mental hospital can say something very intelligent, and he's absolutely right. That doesn't change the pain and the suffering that they're in. We don't stick healthy people in psych hospitals. Dave Rubin has a wonderful show that he puts on. It's actually on YouTube, and it's wonderful because he presents many different points of view from many different people. You have a Jordan Peterson, an Eric Weinstein, a Dave Rubin, and a Ben Shapiro sitting around and talking with each other. 4 people, 4 very different points of view, 4 intelligent people. None of them are crazy. They disagree with each other. They see the world differently, but they're not crazy. And each one of them, the most wonderful thing about when they talk with each other is they don't treat each other that way. There's a respect. When Daniel says that there's only one way to see things, there's only one point of view, it's just not factual. There are many ways to see things. Society does not label healthy people schizophrenics and bipolar. That's not what therapists walk around doing. In fact, in order to see a therapist, you need to initiate the contact, unless something else is going on, in which case the legal system is initiating contact because something else is wrong. But for the most part, most people initiate contact to see therapists because something's going wrong in their life. And that's a good thing. And helping that person to heal is what therapists and therapy is all about. But to label people as crazy or not crazy, and this definitional aspect that is almost like a wild goose chase, is not helpful to anybody. I'm now going to go on to Daniel's final point.
And I've also seen people who are much, much healthier than society, and because of this, they feel totally alienated. They feel lonely. They feel isolated. They have no peers. And they can develop different defenses just to function in society, to be able to deal with the ugliness of society. And sometimes these psychological defenses maybe aren't exactly the healthiest. And so maybe they could be in part here. So I think the bottom line is we're all a bit crazy. It's just a question of figuring out, is our craziness fundamentally crazy, or is it because we're getting society's insanity put on us? And for me, that's been a lot of my healing process.
And that's the last point, is that fundamentally, are we all crazy, or is none of us crazy? And again, in terms of his definition, I don't look at it in any way, shape, or form as reality. The point is what you're doing adaptive in functioning or maladaptive in functioning? Daniel puts the idea out that you could be healthier than society, and you're so healthy that you can never have relationships with anybody else and you need to isolate. If you're that healthy, by your definition, Daniel, then you're unhealthy. Because in order to be a healthy individual, you have to work within the context of people. We are social animals. We don't do well on our own. The worst thing you can do to any human being is put them in solitary confinement and watch what happens to their psyche when they stay there for long periods of time. This is documented. We have to be able to deal in the context of society. Does society have flaws? Absolutely. Are there problems? Absolutely. Should we hash out those differences and talk about them? Absolutely. But don't pathologize people or try to make people who are unhealthy healthy just because it fits an emotional agenda. I don't like the term crazy because it stigmatizes the people who are suffering as it is. We want to be helpful and understanding for people who go through issues. And just because you go through an issue at a part in your life does not mean it has to stay that way. There is help out there, and I hope that you like this video, that you subscribe, and if you believe in what I'm doing, that you'll become supportive. Thank you very much. If you made it this far, I give you a lot of credit.